Isabella held Emmanuel's watch delicately, every detail of it pulling her back to the time they had shared. The worn metal, the faint engraving, the way Emmanuel used to fiddle with it when they spoke, it all came rushing back, flooding her with memories she thought she had buried long ago. Joseph watched her closely, his own eyes glistening with tears. He recognized that look, the look of someone who had truly loved his son. "He never mentioned you," Joseph said softly, as if unsure whether he was ready to hear the story that followed. Isabella sighed, still clutching the watch. "I met Emmanuel when we were young," she began, her voice heavy with the weight of the past. "I was working at a boutique, my first real job in the city. He used to visit with donations for the orphanage where I'd grown up, and that's how we became close." Joseph listened intently, his eyes widening with surprise. "An orphanage?" he repeated, as if it all started to make sense. Isabella nodded, her gaze distant, lost in the flood of memories that had resurfaced. "Yes, I was raised in the orphanage since I was a child," Isabella said, her voice softer. "I never knew my parents, but that place became my home. It was there that I met Emmanuel, kind, full of life, and devoted. We made so many plans for the future, but fate changed everything." Joseph fell silent, absorbing her words. He realized that there was a side of his son's life he had never known, a part he had lost before truly understanding. His heart ached with both longing and gratitude for having found someone who shared that love. "I never knew about that part of his life," Joseph murmured. "After Emmanuel died, my wife Victoria always blamed someone. She said he distanced himself because of a woman, but I never knew the details. All I knew was that after his death, nothing was the same." Isabella shuddered at the mention of Victoria. She remembered the tension with Emmanuel's mother, a woman who never accepted her. "Victoria never thought I was good enough for her son," Isabella said, her voice trembling. "It created a chasm between Emmanuel and his family. He was torn between us, trying to be the perfect son while wanting to live his own life." Joseph, visibly moved, looked up. He hadn't understood the burden his son carried. "He never stopped visiting," Joseph said with a sigh, "but it was rare. And then, the accident." Isabella's heart tightened. The moment she had dreaded was approaching, the day that shattered everything. "That day," Joseph continued, his voice weakening. "It happened so fast. Emmanuel was with her, but I never knew what happened. He was gone, and all I had left was this watch." His eyes fixed on the watch in Isabella's hands, the last connection to his son. Isabella closed her eyes, fighting back tears. "I was with him," she confessed. "We were heading to a friend's house, but we never arrived. There was an accident. When I woke up, he was gone." Tears finally fell as she covered her face, the pain overwhelming her. Joseph, too, wept quietly, tears streaming down his weathered face. "I never knew you were with him," he whispered, his voice broken by grief and regret. Isabella wiped her tears, trying to compose herself. "I loved him with all my heart," she said, "and I lost everything that day." Both had tried to move on, but the past had lingered like a shadow Joseph, sinking into sadness and regret, and Isabella holding on to memories of a love that was cut short. "You were the woman he loved," Joseph murmured, shaking his head, "and I never knew how much that meant to him." Isabella nodded. "I didn't know he was your son until now, but when I saw the watch, it all came back. He always wore it, the gift I gave him when we started planning our future together." Joseph stared into the distance, lost in his own thoughts. "He spoke little about you," Joseph whispered, "but I knew something was pulling him away from us. Victoria never accepted the idea of him being with someone not from our world. She wanted him to marry someone who could elevate our family's status. Isabella smiled sadly. That was never Emmanuel. He wanted a different life, one built on love, not status, but that conflict broke him and it tore us apart. Both sat quietly, the weight of the past settling between them. In the midst of their pain, they realized they had found in each other a shared history, one filled with love, loss, and memories they would never forget. Joseph's voice trembled, full of guilt and sadness. Isabella nodded, understanding. "She hated me," Isabella said softly. "Whenever I tried to get close, I felt her disdain, and Emmanuel, trying to make everyone happy, was torn between two worlds. He was a good man, Joseph. He wanted to make everyone happy, but it broke him." Joseph took a deep breath, his hands trembling slightly. "I never imagined things would turn out like this." After he was gone, Victoria and I drifted even further apart. She blamed herself. And deep down, I think she blamed me too. That's when everything started to fall apart. Isabella looked at Joseph with deep empathy. "How did you end up here?" she asked gently, her voice careful not to reopen old wounds. Joseph let out a sigh. After Emmanuel died, Victoria was never the same. She sank into grief, and I lost my way. Our marriage couldn't survive the guilt, the mourning. We had a comfortable life, but it felt so empty. Victoria always said it was my fault, that if I had been firmer with Emmanuel, things would have been different. Hearing this, Isabella felt a heaviness in her chest. It was painful to know that Victoria saw her as the cause of the family's collapse. "Joseph," she said softly, "it wasn't your fault, or mine. Life sometimes takes us down paths we can't foresee or control. What happened was an accident, but Emmanuel's love for both of us, that was real." Joseph looked at Isabella, tears filling his eyes. "I never thought I'd meet you. I never knew the woman my son loved. It means so much to me." Isabella reached out, touching Joseph's hand lightly. "We share the same loss, Joseph. I don't know why fate brought us together today, but I think it means something. We both need to move forward." For a moment, they sat in silence, reflecting on the revelations they had just shared. Isabella handed the watch back to Joseph, and with a solemn look, he placed it on his wrist. "This watch," Isabella said softly, "it's more than just a keepsake. It's a reminder of the time we spent with Emmanuel. And as much as it hurts, it also reminds us that time moves forward, and we have to as well." Joseph smiled sadly, understanding. "I don't know how to move on," he admitted. "After we lost everything, Victoria and I ended up on the streets. Now we're just surviving." A wave of empathy washed over Isabella. "And where is Victoria now?" she asked, her heart tightening. Joseph lowered his head. "She's waiting for me in a nearby square. We have nowhere else to go, and she's even more broken than I am." Isabella took a deep breath, sensing the need to act. "I want to meet Victoria," she said firmly. "I want to help both of you. I can't change the past, but I can try to make the future better." Isabella's heart raced as she walked alongside Joseph through the busy streets. The words they had exchanged in the café still echoed in her mind. The father of the man she had loved was beside her, leading her to meet the woman who had despised her. Isabella knew this moment would be difficult, but something inside her told her it was the right step. Joseph walked in silence, his steps slow and weary, the years of hardship weighing on him. As they approached the square, Isabella's mind swirled with thoughts. She had never imagined reuniting with Victoria, and now, here she was, about to face the past she had long tried to forget. Isabella's heart trembled, but she knew she had to face this moment. After a few minutes of walking, they arrived at a small, worn square hidden between old buildings. Under the shade of a large tree sat Victoria. The woman Isabella once knew, proud and immaculate, was now a fragile figure. Hunched over, wrapped in a tattered coat, her gray hair carelessly tied back, Victoria's eyes, once filled with pride, now stared into nothing. Joseph approached cautiously, while Isabella followed closely, her heart in her throat. When they were close, Victoria lifted her eyes, exhaustion turning to shock as she saw a stranger beside her husband. "Joseph," she murmured, her voice hoarse. "Who is this woman?" Joseph hesitated before speaking. "Victoria, this is Isabella. She was important to Emmanuel." The name Emmanuel fell heavily between them, rippling through the tense atmosphere. Victoria's eyes widened, quickly filling with anger and disbelief. "You," she spat, her voice cutting. "You're the woman who took him from us, the reason for all our misery." The accusation stung, but Isabella remained calm, determined to stay composed. "Victoria, I understand why you feel that way," she said, her voice steady. "But I'm here to help. We can't change the past, but maybe we can find a way forward." Victoria shook her head, gripping the small bag at her side, her hands trembling. "You don't understand," she whispered. "I lost everything. My son, my life. Nothing makes sense anymore." Isabella felt a deep ache in her chest, seeing the raw pain in Victoria's eyes. Joseph knelt beside his wife, holding her hands gently. "We've both suffered," he said softly. "But we found Isabella today, and she's offering to help us. Maybe it's time to stop running from the past." Victoria looked between Joseph and Isabella, her face a mix of confusion and pain. "Why now?" she asked, her voice cracking. "Why, after everything, would you want to help us?" Isabella knelt beside them, her eyes filled with compassion. "I loved Emmanuel, and I believe that wherever he is, he would want me to help you. He taught me to forgive, to care for others. This is what he would have wanted."